Welcome to the Week Ahead. This is Ibrahim Sani from the AWANI newsroom.
And I'm Hafiz Mazuki from the AWANI studio.
So this week we have plenty in store. We start with the CPI announcement for the first quarter of this year that's expected next week.
Also, the China GDP announcement and the impact to Southeast Asia.
Of course, after that, we shall talk about the Citibank, the big bank, retail bank, making more announcements of them closing shop in Malaysia.
And of course, finally, vaccine phase 2 to start tomorrow.
So let's start with the big announcement of the CPI for our first quarter, because the Consumer Price Index for Malaysia for the first quarter will be announced next week. The last time we announced the CPI, it edged up 0.1% year-on-year in February of this year, after decreasing 0.2% in the previous month, and compared with market consensus of 0.2% rise. There's a lot of expectations into what the CPI announcement is going to be introduced for the first quarter of this year, because it's going to be talking a lot about the inflation rate. In the CPI announcement last year, the inflation rate was the first time that it slightly increased since last year. And the ongoing COVID-19 disruption is one of the main concerns why the inflation rate is going to create that sort of pressure. And the upward pressure came from a few items, including food, alcohol and beverages, and tobacco, education, and other miscellaneous items. So it's interesting to note what the CPI announcement is going to be done for this year.
Yes, exactly, Ibrahim. Of course, this is an important, I would say, metric and measure to look at prices. And this is important because as we are facing a pandemic, a lot of people have lost jobs. Economy is not in the greatest of shape. So it is important to see how the CPI announcement is and how it will affect the consumers.
Of course, on top of that, the jobs rates might also be an interesting look at as well. We don't know when the jobs rates are going to be announced, perhaps next week, perhaps even later than that. For now, the unemployment rate is about 5%, and we're looking at over 800,000 of Malaysians not being employed currently. We haven't even talked about underemployment. Any figure from 1.2 million to 1.8 million people being underemployed is being touted. But because it's not being properly measured by DOSM or the Department of Statistics, it's very hard for us to determine that as well. Moving on to our second story, which is, of course, China GDP. China, of course, on Friday, announced the number of their growth rate, and China economy grows by a record of 18.3% in the first quarter. China's economy expanded for the first 3 months because of a low base, and this is the fastest year-on-year rate for any quarter on record. This is highlighting the extent to which the country has rebounded from the coronavirus pandemic. One item that is worth noting is that if you came first into the pandemic, you also came out from the pandemic first as well. This would definitely help in the recovery. And because China was the first country to be hit by the pandemic, they are also the first country to recover from it. And the true testament to this argument is in their rebounding of the first quarter economy rising to 18%.
But Ibrahim, my question is, when we look at this in understanding China's GDP announcement, of course, China is a superpower, and the rate of recovery will definitely be different. But how important it is for China to actually bounce back strong for the region?
It's very important. If you think about it, we import the most from China, we export the most to China, and we're not the only ones having this kind of export-import portfolio. Thailand, Indonesia, I don't know about Singapore, I'm not too sure. I think US might be one of the bigger trading partners when it comes to trading partners for last year, trading partners for last quarter. So a lot of countries import and export out of China. If China is stuck when it comes to their production, a lot of countries and a lot of sectors will be impacted as well. If you think about it, microchips and semiconductors, those are the two items that is being stuck for the past 1 year. That's why anything from phone deliveries to iPad deliveries to even, by the way, your PS5, Hafiz, is stuck. And it's because of China having a hiccup towards the last 2 quarters. And I think because of the rebounding that we've seen in the first quarter of this year, it's going to be interesting to note that it's always good to have China back rebounding from the pandemic.
Exactly. And I think moving on to the next item on our list, Citigroup Incorporated will be exiting its consumer banking franchises in 13 markets across Asia and Europe as part of its ongoing refreshing of its strategy. And this was the announcement made by the American banking group last Thursday, or April 15th. However, in this announcement, the Singapore market will not be affected by the move, and they made the announcement in the statement. And the 13 consumer franchises that will be affected are Australia, Bahrain, China, India, Indonesia, South Korea, the Philippines, Poland, Russia, Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, and of course, Malaysia. And I'm quoting Jane Fraser, which is the Citi's Global Chief Executive Officer, who said that the group intends to double down on wealth. And she's also said that we will operate our consumer banking franchise in Asia and EMEA, Europe, the Middle East and Africa, solely from our wealth centers, Singapore, Hong Kong, United Arab Emirates and London. And this positions us to capture the strong growth and also attractive returns the wealth management business offers through these important hubs. And of course, I think a lot of us here in Malaysia do own a Citibank card or engage in their services. But what does it mean, Ibrahim? Maybe you could share with us.
All right. I was actually personally involved in such a closure when Bank Lipo closed their retail banking arm to be merged with Bank Niaga. That was, I think, 10 years ago. And the way they can approach this are through three ways. Number one, by selling their consumer credit outright to other retail banks that might be interested in buying them. What does this mean? This means that if you own a Citibank credit card, for instance, or a Citibank housing loan today, by the time they sell your credit to another bank, that means the home loan from Citibank that you took or the credit card that you have with Citibank is automatically transferred to the new bank. That's one option. Another option is, of course, Citibank runs down the credit with no intention of growing your business. I.e., if you have a credit card, which you do, Hafiz, also I have a Citibank credit card, we have, let's say, a credit limit of 10,000, 100,000, whatever, and we run down the credit limit until we are finished paying off that credit card debt. And then, of course, we just close that or cancel that card altogether. That's the second option, which is quite likely. And the third, of course, is a hybrid of the two. And we don't know what kind of announcements that is going to come from this. This was first being reported by The Edge, citing international news reports as well. But next week, we're going to see some announcements by Citibank to actually manage this. Now, of course, managing credit is something that banks do extremely well. That's their bread and butter after all. But we have to think about the job losses, not just in Malaysia, but Citibank employees across these 13 countries. Retail banking, employs a lot of people as compared to investment banking or corporate banking. So imagine all the jobs losses from all these 13 markets in Thailand, Vietnam, Australia, you name it, Malaysia. Where will all these jobs go to? Will it go to their corporate banking arm or investment banking arm, or will they be retrenched outright? So that is an item that we have to see in the announcement, possibly to come next week. And of course, to consumers like you and me, Hafiz, I think it's a neutral stance. I think we shall continue to use and enjoy the benefits of the credit from Citibank, but we don't know whether or not the service level quality is going to be maintained. After all, right now, the incentive for them to keep their customers happy is essential because we want more credit from them. What happens if the business model doesn't require you have more credit? I.e., we're talking about wealth just now, right? Citibank wants to focus on wealth and the wealth centers that you spoke of. Hong Kong, for instance, high net worth individuals are there. A lot of them are there. Singapore can be said as well. A lot of high net worth individuals within the region congregate in Singapore, UAE in London as well. So I don't know whether the incentive to keep their customers happy are going to be there still.
Based on your insight, Ibrahim, I mean, you're talking about consumers like you and me, and also the employees employed by the Citibank group. But I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, how does this impact the local banking scene, if I may say? Because if I'm a local bank, or rather, we're talking here about Maybank, CIB. It is a bit of a, when a big banking group exit your market, it's basically an enlargement of the pie, right?
It is, but it's also cost that we have to think about. Retail bank is the most profitable amongst all the three other branches when it comes to corporate banking as well as investment banking. But because of it having a big margin, it also brings about big cost. And I think it's smart for Citibank to focus on wealth management because this is a service based business, a fee-based business, or FBI, as we would like to call it back in the retail banking scene. And because of that, it's always important to optimize your cost. It comes to no surprise as to Citibank coming to close their retail businesses in Asia as well as 13 other markets. But it also means that this is a sector that is facing internal consolidation rather timely. And what does this mean to, say, for instance, international banks operating in countries like Malaysia? What does this mean to UOB, HSBC, Standard Chartered? Will we see them consolidating their retail businesses in the years, if not months, to come? Those are the kind of items that we have to think about. Before we go into the break, we shall talk a little bit about what's coming up next week when it comes to the annual general meetings or AGMs. We have the PET Gas or Petronas Gas AGM happening on the 20th of April. Maxis, a big company, 22nd of April, and Petronas Chemicals AGM or PCG will take place on 24th of April. These are interesting AGMs to speak about, but the most interesting AGM that we have to speak about is the big embarrassment that is of Maybank. Because, and this is fact, the country's largest company by way of market capitalization did not or was unable to execute the annual general meeting flawlessly on Thursday on 15th of April due to technical glitches. Shareholders couldn't vote on some of the resolutions, and because of that, they are postponing the AGM to a later date. This is a big embarrassment for Maybank, but at the same time comes to show the vulnerabilities of doing things online via a virtual event. We're not talking about a Zoom call here, we're talking about an AGM, but hiccups like this do happen. What are your thoughts, Hafiz?
I mean, looking at it, when I saw the statement, it kind of flabbergasted me, right? Because I was like, okay, it's unheard of. I mean, usually when an AGM is scheduled, it's there and then, you know, date, day, time set. And of course, understanding current pandemic circumstances where it involves hybrid or even fully online, it does beg the question is, what's the future of so-called large AGMs involving banks? Because I think we spoke about this last week also, Ibrahim, where I've shared a bit of my experience attending an AGM, and I think those days are over, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, because everyone is a bit wary of the pandemic. But I don't know, maybe a new industry will come out of this, you know, people who offer services or companies, internet companies who offer services to ensure that AGMs can be done smoothly, without any hiccups, shareholders can vote, everything can be done transparently. I think we have to keep an eye on this.
We have to, but before we go for the break, Hafiz, CIMB also held their AGM on Thursday, and it went flawlessly. Just saying. We'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the vaccine rollout on the 19th of April. Welcome back. The second phase of Malaysia's national vaccination exercise, which will prioritize the elderly, like my mom, for instance, those with morbidity or comorbidity problems, and people with disabilities, will start on April 19th. Again, I just want to put it out there, my mom who lives in Perlis is going to be amongst the first in the phase 2 to accept that vaccination. And we suspect it's going to be the Sinovac from China, but I keep on telling her it's going to be just fine. Hafiz, what do you think?
Yeah, actually my grandmother also managed to convince her to actually register for the vaccination. And she already has a date for the vaccination. And it is good news, right? I mean, basically, the government has already started. Because if I'm not mistaken, the COVID-19 immunization program coordinating minister Khairi Jamaluddin said that all these people who are scheduled to get the vaccinations under the phase 2 are expected to get 2 weeks earlier the date for their vaccination. And I think this is important, right? Because if you look at the current situation of the pandemic in the country, I think on Friday, the cases reached above 2,000. The number of 2,000, and it's very worrying to see, because right now people are talking about the rise of the fourth wave of COVID, and honestly, Ibrahim, I am getting tired of hearing of the numbers increasing in terms of the waves, because it means that everyone have to be more wary, more lockdowns. We are facing, we cannot open the economy as fast as we want to, despite all the measures that have been put in place.
Yeah. I just want to show you one particular graphic. So we're going to pin this graphic right now. As you can see on your screen, this was presented by the Special Committee of Ensuring Access to COVID-19 Vaccine Supply, JKJAV, and was shared by PIC Minister Khairi Jamaluddin. It shows the vaccine supply and demand status as of last week, where the current total registration is about 9 million. Also good, because as phase 2 starts, the government wants up to 9 million people to be registered. But the more important thing is that line that snakes up, that one, that was talking about the cumulative supply of all vaccines when it comes to the population equivalents. And until June, or up until June, there will be a shortage of supply of vaccines that is going to be made available for people that have registered for total registration. If, and only if, the COVID supply vaccines are in place, and in the weeks and months to come, we're going to hear more about this from JKJAV as well as from Khairi himself. And if it's done, perhaps up until October, and only up until October do we have enough vaccines for everyone. And that is why it's important for us to take a look at this graph long and hard to understand that the earlier we get people vaccinated, particularly those with comorbidities and the elderly, the better for folks like you and me, Hafiz, get the vaccines ourselves, because we are not going to be shortlisted or frontlined against the people that needs this more than us. And people that are watching right now, particularly those that are elderly, number one, congratulations to you for reaching this status in your life. But number two, pat yourself on the back if you are ready to take the vaccines. It's important that you sign up for the vaccine registration through my Sejahtera account, as well as turn up. It's not just that, sign up, but turn up at the vaccination centers, or else people like me are going to be at a disadvantage because we're not going to get our vaccines anytime soon.
Exactly. If we look at the current registration numbers, and of course, what you mentioned earlier is, of course, the total registration. But if we look at the group that the government is aiming to vaccinate for phase 2 specifically, there's about above 9 million, more than 9 million people are involved in this phase 2, which involves the elderly, people with comorbidities, disabilities, etc., etc. So out of that number, I guess less than or around 30% have registered so far, and we're talking about the vaccination process starting tomorrow. So there is this rolling target thing that the government has to balance, because I think this is probably why Khairi actually brought forward some of this, what he called as the economic frontliners, because he wants to ensure that as the vaccines come, the population is inoculated, so that we don't have an oversupply of vaccine because not enough people are registering. So Ibrahim, I think this is a major issue about there are two things here, right? One thing is, of course, the registration process, and I believe that the government is trying their best, whether through manually, through phone calls.
Well, they got up to 8-point-something million, so that's good. They wanted 9 million, up to 9
exactly,
million.
But we
it's
need
not that far off, but not enough still, but not that far off.
I remembered in a conversation with Tan Sri Jamila, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. She said that it's relatively easy, or it's achievable to get 50% of the population vaccinated, because generally people like you and I, we have no issues with vaccine. We'll straight yes, I say yes to the vaccines. It's the other 30% needed to be convinced, so that is critical here, so that we can achieve herd immunity. Because at the end of the day, if everyone who is willing to be vaccinated turn up, then we didn't reach that 80% number. What's next?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to cover this news every day, up to date on Astro AWANI. So do keep up with all the updates on Astro AWANI. But before we end the show, we want to talk a little bit more about the cabotage issue. We've had all the stakeholders in, and including that of the very strange interview that we did with Masa, the shipping industry guy. Coming through all this, next week we're going to wait for more announcements from the Cabinet, because last week the Cabinet has announced a the research it was asking all the ministers to study the cabotage policy, including the submarine cable repairs, and they have decided that several ministers are tasked to report back in 2 weeks with recommendations. And this is said by Minister of Science and Technology, Khadijah Jamaluddin. He also says that 5 other ministers, as well as therefore ministries, have been instructed to deliberate on the impact on the cabotage policy exemption that would have digital investments and the local shipping industry outright. But I'm going to save them 2 weeks, and I'm going to tell them right now that between the two industries that we need to grow, it's actually hands down and without doubt, it's going to be the digital industry that we need to grow excessively and with a lot of aggravation. I think the shipping industry has not been growing, not just in Malaysia, but in all the other countries in the world. In fact, countries that do well in digital tend to do well in other respects. So I'm not too sure why it will take them 2 weeks to decide which sector is beneficial to the other.
I think, Ibrahim, when we look at this, right? Honestly, I'm going to be honest with you here. I'm not an expert on cabotage. In fact, for the longest time, it is something that I know very briefly. But the past 2 weeks, after interviewing the MDEC chairman, you consider this, Dr. Rais, and also studying or reading through a couple of the statements made by everyone involved, including stakeholders like the MyIX chairperson, it is a fine line that they need to balance, right? Because at the end of the day, they do want to also build local capacity. And I think this is like one of the critical, I would say, consideration that they have to make when making this decision. However, it is important, and I'm quoting Dr. Rais Hussein here, he said, please ensure that everyone's interests are looked into, because we don't want, just for the sake of building local capacity, we ignore critical investments from outside. So I think it's fair for more ministries to be involved in this. Of course, I know there is a political aspect or political dimension to this issue, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Secretary General of the AP, Lim Guan Eng, has said that it took former Transport Minister Anthony Loke just by himself to make this decision when PH was in administration post-2018. However, it is very important to look at this issue thoroughly. I don't think we should make any hasty decisions. It is important for us to look and weigh the risks and rewards of this policy. Ibrahim.
Fantastic. That's all we have for you in the week ahead. Plenty of items for us to keep track of, and all of them will be brought to you from Astro AWANI. Until then, thanks very much for watching. My name is Ibrahim Sani.
And I'm Hafiz Mazuki, signing off for the evening.
Fantastic.